All right, let's talk about a discovery that basically threw a giant wrench into the timeline of human history. It's called Göbekli Tepe, a site in Turkey that's so old and so unexpected, it's forced us to rethink everything we thought we knew about how civilization even began.
You know that story we all learned in school? The one about how civilization got started? For a really long time, the answer seemed pretty simple. A nice, neat story of human progress.
So, the old story, the textbook version, goes like this. First, we clever humans invent farming. Then, because we have a steady food supply, we settle down in villages. And only then, with all this free time and full bellies, do we start thinking about big things like religion and building giant temples. Makes sense, right? Well, Göbekli Tepe blows that whole idea out of the water. The evidence here suggests the exact opposite happened. The giant temple came first, built by hunter-gatherers. And the need to feed all the people coming to this temple, that might be the very reason we invented farming in the first place. Religion, it seems, might have built the first civilization. So what is this place that's causing all the fuss? Göbekli Tepe is this absolutely mind-bogglingly ancient complex of huge stone circles. We're talking 11,600 years old. That's thousands of years before Stonehenge, thousands of years before the pyramids. But here's the real kicker, the part that has archaeologists just scratching their heads. It was built by people who were still hunting and gathering. They didn't have farming, they didn't even have pottery. And that fact alone is a massive mystery.
Okay, so if we want to get to the bottom of this mystery, where do we start? Well, you start with the most obvious clue, right in front of your face. The sheer scale of the place. We're not talking about a few simple huts here. This was a massive engineering project that, by all accounts, just shouldn't have been possible for people back then.
Okay, get ready for this number. 20 tons. Some of the individual T-shaped pillars here weigh up to 20 tons. To put that in perspective, that's like 4 huge elephants. Now, how in the world do you quarry, move, and stand up something that massive with nothing but Stone Age tools? How did they pull that off?
Well, the crazy part is, we actually know. Archaeologists found an unfinished pillar still in the quarry, like a frozen-in-time instruction manual. You can see how they used simple flint tools to painstakingly chip away these deep channels in the limestone bedrock. Then, and this is super clever, they used natural weak points in the stone to basically pop the whole slab free. After that, it was all about teamwork. We're talking hundreds of people using logs as rollers, using wooden levers, moving this beast over 100 meters to its final spot. This isn't just brute force. This is sophisticated, applied physics. And you have to remember, this place wasn't built in a day. It was used and changed and added to for over 1,500 years. That's an insane amount of time. You can actually see the evolution right here in the archaeology. The earliest layer is all about these huge, open, circular rooms with massive freestanding pillars. You can just imagine huge crowds gathering there for rituals. But then, 1,000 years later, things change. The rooms get smaller, they become rectangular, and the pillars are sort of built into the walls. It's a huge shift, maybe from a special occasion pilgrimage site to something more like a settled village. Which leads to the next huge question, right? If you're a nomadic hunter-gatherer, why would you drop everything to go do back-breaking construction work for months on end? What could possibly motivate you? Well, the answer seems to be a massive party. Archaeologists have a name for this. They call it the feasting hypothesis. And the idea is pretty simple, really. You want to build something epic? You throw an epic feast. It's how you get people from all over to show up, it's how you build a team spirit, and it's how you reward them for all their hard work. The currency wasn't money, it was food, community, and, well, a good time.
And when we say feast, we mean feast. The evidence is just staggering. They've dug up hundreds of thousands of animal bones. And look at what they were eating. Mostly wild game, like gazelle and aurochs, which were these huge wild cattle. The sheer numbers are off the charts. This is industrial scale consumption. We're talking about feeding an army of workers. But hey, it wasn't just a big barbecue. You gotta have something to wash it all down with, right? Check this out. They found these massive stone vats. One could hold 160 liters. And when they tested the chemical gunk left inside, yep, they found the telltale signature of fermented grain. They were brewing primitive beer, and they were brewing a lot of it. This was literally the world's first and biggest work party.
Okay, and this is where it gets really important. You can't organize a party like this, a project of this scale, without leaders. Someone had to be in charge. Someone had to coordinate the hunters, manage the beer making, and tell people where to put the giant pillars. This is basically the birth of social hierarchy. It completely shatters that old idea that all hunter-gatherer groups were perfectly equal.
So we've got the how. They used incredible engineering and they fueled it with massive feasts. But that leaves the biggest question of all. Why? What was so important that it drove them to do all this? Well, the answer, or at least a big clue, is carved right into the stone all around the site.
The art is just amazing. But what's really interesting is what they carved. It's not the animals they were eating for dinner. Nope. They carved the scary stuff. The powerful, the dangerous, the venomous. We're talking foxes, vultures, scorpions, snakes, giant wild boars. These weren't just pretty pictures. These were symbols loaded with meaning. Maybe they were clan totems, or powerful spirits, or even their gods.
And here's maybe the biggest mind bend of all. Those giant T-pillars, they're not just pillars. Look closer. You can see arms carved on the sides, hands meeting at the front. Some even have belts and loincloths carved on them. That T-shape, that's a head, a stylized, faceless human head. We're looking at giant statues of humanoid beings, maybe ancestors, maybe spirits, maybe gods, all standing there, watching over the ceremonies. Now, of all the carvings, none gets more attention than this one, Pillar 43, the Vulture Stone. And there's a huge debate about what it means. On one hand, you have mainstream archaeologists. They look at it and see a funeral, a sky burial specifically. The headless man is the deceased, the vultures are carrying away the flesh, and that circle is the skull which would be saved later. But then, there's a totally different idea, an alternative theory that says this is not a funeral at all, but a map of the stars, recording a massive comet impact that triggered a mini ice age. Now, that comet idea is really popular online, but for archaeologists working at the site, the evidence just doesn't add up. First off, the timing's all wrong. The pillar was carved more than 1,000 years after the supposed impact happened. Also, these enclosures probably had roofs, which makes them pretty terrible for stargazing. And maybe most importantly, the comet theory has to ignore a lot of other details on the stone, like the very prominent phallus on the headless man. That's a pretty powerful symbol of life and rebirth. Not exactly the first thing you'd carve to commemorate a doomsday event. For a long time, the story of Göbekli Tepe was that it was this one-of-a-kind anomaly, a single, bizarre temple that just popped up out of nowhere. But what if I told you that was completely wrong? That Göbekli Tepe wasn't alone, that it was just the beginning.
So was this incredible site an isolated phenomenon, a total fluke in human history? We now know the answer is a hard no, not even close.
Okay, you really need to brace yourself for this because this is the part that changes the game completely. It turns out Göbekli Tepe isn't one site. It's just the most famous site in a whole network of at least a dozen others, a project they're calling Taş Tepeler, or the Stone Hills. And they're all unique. You go to a place called Karahan Tepe, and they're carving things right out of the bedrock and making these intense 3D human statues. You go to another site, Cyberch, and they find what might be the world's oldest story told in a single scene. This isn't just one temple anymore. We are looking at an entire lost civilization. And all of this brings us right back to that incredible, upside-down idea from the site's original excavator, Klaus Schmidt. He said it best, the temple built the village, not the other way around. Think about that. The desire to come together, to perform rituals, to build something magnificent, that was the real driver. Agriculture wasn't the cause of civilization. It was the solution to a problem. How do we feed everyone who wants to be part of this? All right, for this last part, I want to jump all the way from the Stone Age to the present day. Because something happened recently that provided an absolutely stunning final word on the genius of these ancient builders. On February 6, 2023, a truly catastrophic earthquake devastated that exact region of Turkey. Modern buildings, reinforced with concrete and steel, were completely leveled. But Göbekli Tepe? The 11,000-year-old megalith stood there, completely undamaged. It's unbelievable. Their ancient design, built low to the ground on solid bedrock, turned out to be more earthquake-proof than much of our own modern engineering. And I think that's the ultimate lesson of Göbekli Tepe. It's a reminder that our story is so much older, stranger, and more complex than we ever imagined. And the wildest part? Archaeologists think they've only excavated maybe 5% of this entire network of sites. 5%. It just makes you wonder, right? What other revolutions in our understanding, what other stories about who we really are still buried right beneath our feet?